Hi, we're going to talk today about integrating sources. This will talk about how to make proper use of the work of other people. We'll go over some techniques for bringing others' terms, phrases, and passages into your essays. Academic writing is intertextual in nature, which means texts work together to shape the meaning of other texts. So think about it. What do you have to say? What have other people said, and how do you respond to that? What others have said can be found in what other people have written, and your response will be found in your own writing. Intertextual writing requires you to shift material from one context to another. If you remember, context is the circumstance in which things are written. We make our points by relying on other texts to help us out, and we take from them and transplant them to our papers as a means of support. So we move from the original to ours. However, when you transplant, you have to be very careful not to change the context. When you include another person's terms, phrases, or passages in your essay, you're putting quoted material to use in a new way, in the context of your own paper. In other words, you're moving text from one location to another, and you're uprooting it from its original home and transplanting it into new soil. But to get the transplant to take root, you have to prepare the soil. So, think about the context of the original source and the context of your essay. The original material is already embedded in the context of the source. You're hoping to move it over to support your points. So you have to make sure that you don't change the context. Let's say you want to extract the following passage from its original source to become a part of your essay. This is a passage taken from the work of an historian of reading practices. You can read over the passage. So if we transplant that work without doing any kind of prep work in our own writing, here's how it'll read. Slave owners in the American South forbade literacy for African Americans, fearing that such a skill would foster discontent or even rebellion. Someone able to read one sentence is able to read all. More important, that reader has now the possibility of reflecting upon the sentence, of acting upon it, of giving it a meaning. Violation of literacy prohibitions were met with severe punishment, whippings, beatings, and even death. So here we have your own writing, and then essentially out of nowhere comes this passage of other people's text. So to do it a little better and give it at least minimal preparation, here's what that would look like. You have the opening writing, and then, as Manuel says. Well, that helps, but who's Manuel, and why should I trust this author? So here, you see Manuel's phrase slips into this new context almost undetected. The writer has adjusted her syntax so the phrase blends seamlessly into the new environment. This isn't incorrect, it's just unsophisticated, since the writer doesn't indicate exactly what relevance Manuel's passage has to her own agenda. And troublingly, we're left to assume that whatever Manuel says is right just by the virtue of him having said it, because the author doesn't tell us why she values his insight and doesn't acknowledge its importance in her own argument. So, as a reader, we don't know why this is here, how it helps the argument, who this author is, and why what they say matters. The writer makes no distinction between her prose and Manuel's passage, except, of course, the quotation marks and the mention of his name and page number. As it now stands, we just don't know what is attempting to be done with this passage. Why did the author use these words to help make her point? The best way she could have done this to make her point is to give more information and make it clear as to why that passage had come into play. So let's talk about adapting passages using mechanical tools. The ... that you often see is called an ellipsis. It's used to indicate when you've omitted words in the midst of a passage. Here we use ellipsis to take out irrelevant pieces that don't add to our argument, and that's fine so long as you don't change context. So here you see part of the comprehensive system of racism, today as in the past. Well, that phrase works for that original context, but for your paper, you felt you didn't need that, so you used an ellipsis to eliminate that unnecessary phrase. Here again you see that a large section is taken out because we're not going to reference back to figure 1. So the author has selected this whole sentence to come out. And there again, that helps avoid overly long passages or passages that start rambling without all of the material in the passage being relevant to supporting what you're trying to say. Next we have brackets, which are used when we modify or add words or letters in original quotes. So here you see the original passage, then the adapted passage is the perpetuation of this highly hierarchical system, and in brackets to explain what system they've added of systemic racism. This clarifies what the author is saying, and that way we ensure that the original context is preserved. It's also, and again, it's used to add or modify what's in the original quote. So here they add slaves, even as they, in brackets, slaves, so that it's clear who they happen to be in this passage. And here, because they are adapting it to fit into their sentence, the capital I has been changed to a lowercase, so that's bracketed to indicate that the original material was changed. When there are quotes within a quote, we have to use the double and single quotation marks. For example, here we see Fegan points out that Jacob's enslaved life was one of many years of what she terms a cage of obscene birds. So in the original, it was able to use the double quotation marks, but because we're moving that into a quote within a quote, we use the single quotation marks around cage of obscene birds, and then the double quotation marks around the end of the quote. If you're using an already quoted quotation, such as here, where Fegan is quoting from William Wells Brown, if you're taking the William Wells Brown quotation that you're seeing in Fegan and moving it into your own paper, you need to indicate that by stating quoted in Fegan. That lets your reader know that you didn't research and find the William Wells Brown quote on your own. You located that as a source within your source. So, if you take care in extracting and transplanting others' terms, phrases, and passages, they'll flourish in their new home. And again, make sure that you're citing and properly indicating material that is not your own. This is very important to avoid plagiarism. Thank you.